"Don't buy the horse," she whispered. "Choose me, rancher. I just want to be free." Ethan had always loved the quiet of the Montana plains. The soft wind brushing through the tall grasses, the endless stretch of sky painted in shades of orange and pink at sunset. It was the kind of place that made a person feel small and at the same time completely alive. He had grown up around horses, learning to ride almost before he could walk, but owning a ranch of his own was a dream that had taken years to achieve. Now, standing in the early morning light, he could finally walk among the herd of horses he had worked so hard to gather. The air smelled of hay, earth, and the faint hint of leather from the saddles hung in the barn. That morning was different from the usual routine. He had planned to inspect the new horses arriving from an auction the previous week. Most of them were healthy, well-fed, and curious, pawing at the ground or nudging each other as they tried to adjust to their new surroundings. But one horse was unlike the others. She stood at the edge of the corral, separate from the rest. Her coat was dull, not the shiny chestnut or black that gleamed in the sunlight, but a muted brown streaked with lighter patches where her fur had thinned. Her ribs showed slightly through her skin, a testament to the hard times she had endured. Yet there was something in her eyes that made Ethan pause. It was not fear exactly, though she carried that too. It was a deep, searching intelligence, the kind that seemed to know more than a regular horse should. He walked slowly toward her, careful not to make sudden movements. Horses could sense a person's intentions, and he didn't want to scare her. Each step he took was deliberate, measured, as though he were learning a silent language spoken only between humans and horses. She didn't move away, but she didn't approach either. She watched him with wide, alert eyes, and for a moment, Ethan felt something strange, as if she were not just looking at him, but seeing him, weighing him. There were rumors about her among the ranchers in the area. She had been rescued from a neglectful owner, then sold again and again, each new caretaker failing to connect with her. Some said she had been abused, others that she simply didn't trust people. But Ethan knew better than to believe gossip. He had learned long ago that horses, like people, carried their stories in quiet ways, in the way they moved, the tension in their muscles, the flicker of their ears. He reached out slowly, letting his hand hover in the air for a few seconds before moving closer. She flinched slightly but did not run. Her nostrils twitched, smelling him, testing him. He whispered softly, though he knew she might not understand his words. The sound of his voice, calm and steady, seemed to matter more than the meaning. "Easy," he said, stepping just a little closer. "I'm not here to hurt you." And then it happened. That small, almost imperceptible gesture, a tilt of her head, a soft step forward, a slight relax in her shoulders, made Ethan's heart skip. For a moment it was as if she had spoken to him without words. "Don't buy the horse, choose me. I just want to be free." The thought came not in sound, but in feeling, like a quiet pulse of understanding passing between them. It made him stop and breathe slowly, realizing that he could not look at her the same way as he did the other horses. She was different. The ranch was alive with activity, as usual. The other horses neighed and shuffled, eager for breakfast. A barn cat darted between the hay bales, its soft paws making no sound on the wooden floor. But Ethan was focused only on her. He crouched slightly, letting himself appear smaller, less threatening. She shifted her weight, moving her hooves lightly against the dirt, testing him, waiting. And then, just a little closer, she let him touch her neck. The first contact was electric in its simplicity. Her coat was coarse and dry in some places, soft in others, and there was a warmth in her body that made him feel connected, grounded. She didn't flinch away. Instead, she lowered her head slightly, letting him rub her gently behind the ears. For hours, it felt like time had slowed. Ethan had been around horses all his life, but this was different. This was not just a horse learning to trust a person. It was a living being reaching out, carefully, seeking understanding, and giving a silent promise that if treated well, she would allow a bond to grow. As the morning wore on, Ethan fed the herd. He watched the other horses graze and play, but his eyes kept drifting back to her. She stayed at the edge, occasionally stepping forward, always watching, always cautious. He wondered what she had endured, who had hurt her, and why. Why had she lost her trust in people when she had been born to run free across wide open spaces? And yet here she was, still willing to consider him, still offering a chance. He gave her a name without even realizing it. "Liberty," he whispered, letting the word roll off his tongue. It seemed fitting. She had survived hardships that would have broken most horses, and she had lived with courage, waiting for someone who would see her not as a prize to be won, but as a soul to be understood. He hoped he could be that person. Over the next few days, Ethan returned to the barn early each morning. He spent hours with Liberty, learning her rhythms, noticing the way she flinched at sudden movements or quiet sounds. He learned to speak without words, using soft pats, slow blinks, and gentle nudges. Every small gesture of trust from her felt like a triumph. He could see it in her eyes. Each day she let him come a little closer. Each day she allowed him to brush the tangles from her mane or offer her an extra handful of oats. But trust was a delicate thing. A single wrong step could send her retreating into fear. Ethan learned patience in ways he hadn't before. He watched her in silence, following her gaze when she paused to look at distant trees or a passing hawk. He realized that understanding Liberty meant more than feeding her or cleaning her stall. It meant watching her, listening to her, and letting her guide the connection. She was cautious, yes, but she was also brave. Each moment she chose to remain near him was a choice she had earned through her own strength. One evening, after the sun had dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in purples and golds, Ethan sat outside the barn, a cup of coffee warming his hands. Liberty approached slowly, her hooves crunching softly on the dirt path. She stopped a few feet away, head tilted as if studying him. He reached out, and this time she stepped closer without hesitation. He scratched her along the neck, feeling the tension in her muscles slowly ease. For a long while they sat together in quiet companionship, two beings sharing the same space without needing words. Ethan knew the world beyond his ranch was complicated. People often saw horses as property, objects to be bought or sold. But Liberty had taught him something important, that freedom, respect, and understanding were worth more than ownership. She had survived countless hardships and still carried herself with dignity and quiet strength. And in that, he found a deep admiration he hadn't expected. By the end of the week, the bond between them had grown into something undeniable. Liberty trusted him enough to approach without fear, to allow small touches, and to meet his gaze with recognition. Ethan had made a silent vow to her. He would never force her into a life she did not choose. He would not see her as property, but as a companion, a friend, a soul who had suffered and survived and deserved the chance to live on her own terms. And in that moment, Ethan understood why that first morning had felt so different. Liberty hadn't just captured his attention. She had asked him to see her, truly see her, and to make a choice. The choice was clear now, though the path ahead was uncertain. She needed freedom, yes, but she also needed someone who would honor her trust, someone willing to walk beside her without claiming her. And Ethan was ready to be that person. The wind swept across the plains as the stars began to appear, one by one, in the deepening sky. Liberty nuzzled his shoulder briefly before stepping back, her eyes shining in the moonlight. And Ethan, sitting in the quiet of the Montana night, felt a warmth in his chest. He had found more than a horse. He had found a companion, a spirit as strong and free as the land itself. And he knew, somehow, that this was only the beginning of a story neither of them would ever forget. Days turned into weeks, and each morning Ethan returned to the barn with a sense of quiet anticipation. Liberty had become the center of his thoughts, though he would never admit aloud how much her presence affected him. There was something in the way she moved, graceful but wary, that reminded him that trust was earned, not given. He approached each day with patience, never rushing her, never forcing her into a gesture she was not ready to make. Ethan had learned early on that Liberty's past had left marks invisible to most people. Her coat still bore the faint scars of previous neglect, but the deeper wounds were in her spirit. She had been passed from one owner to another, treated as an object to be used rather than a living creature to be respected. Each encounter with humans had left her cautious, measuring them in ways that were almost human. But unlike many horses who had given up entirely, Liberty had survived with an unbroken spark in her eyes, a quiet defiance that made Ethan realize she was more than just a horse. She was a survivor. Ethan's mornings began with careful routines. He would gather a small bucket of oats, sometimes mixing in a touch of molasses to entice her. He would step into the corral, pausing to let her see him from a distance, letting her decide if today was a day she wanted to come closer. Some days she would ignore him, grazing at the far edge of the paddock, ears flicking nervously at his approach. Other days, she would walk a cautious step or two forward, sniffing the air, as if testing the intention behind his every move. One morning after a week of slow progress, Liberty surprised him. She had been standing apart from the herd, tail flicking, alert. Ethan walked slowly, keeping his hands visible and voice soft. "Good morning, Liberty," he said, crouching slightly. The horse's ears twitched, and for the first time she didn't move away. Instead, she lowered her head just enough for him to reach out. His hand hovered near her neck, then brushed against her mane. She didn't flinch. She didn't shy away. That small, almost imperceptible act filled Ethan with a quiet joy. It was not victory, not yet. It was something better, a first sign of trust. He spoke softly to her as he ran his fingers through the coarse strands of her mane. "I won't hurt you," he said. "I promise." Liberty shifted her weight, allowing him to scratch behind her ears. She didn't nuzzle him or seek affection, but the subtle relaxation in her stance told him she was beginning to understand that he was not a threat. Over the next several days, Ethan learned to read her moods and movements. Horses were creatures of habit, and Liberty had routines shaped by fear and caution. She would pace when nervous, pawing lightly at the ground, or flick her tail sharply when startled. Ethan paid attention to every detail. The direction of her ears, the way she held her head, the slight tremor in her legs when unsure. He began to anticipate her reactions, moving in ways that made her feel safe and rewarding her bravery with gentle words and small treats. Ethan also learned that Liberty had a playful side, hidden beneath layers of caution. When she was alone in the paddock, she would sometimes toss her head, kick up her heels, and run in tight circles, as if celebrating the freedom she had yet to fully claim. On these days, Ethan would watch from a distance, careful not to intrude, smiling at her antics. He realized that trust was not just about quiet obedience or allowing touch. It was also about giving her space to express herself, to be the horse she was meant to be. One afternoon, a sudden gust of wind carried a strange scent across the paddock. Liberty's ears pricked, her muscles tensing, and she bolted a few steps before stopping, eyes wide and nostrils flaring. Ethan remained calm, raising his hand slightly to show he was not chasing her. "Easy, Liberty," he said, his voice steady. Slowly, she approached him again, cautious but willing to accept his calm presence. That moment reinforced a lesson he had learned long ago. Trust was fragile, and it could be tested at any time. But each test, handled with patience, strengthened the bond between them. Ethan also observed how Liberty interacted with the other horses. She kept her distance from most of them, especially those that were more aggressive or playful in a rough way. Yet, she had one companion in the herd, a gentle older mare named Daisy, who had also experienced hardship. When Liberty was nervous, she would often move closer to Daisy, seeking comfort in silent solidarity. Ethan noticed these patterns, understanding that Liberty was learning to navigate social bonds not just with humans, but with her fellow horses. It reminded him that healing was not only about individual trust, it was about belonging, too. As weeks passed, their connection deepened. Liberty began to approach Ethan voluntarily, allowing him to touch her without hesitation. Sometimes she would nuzzle his shoulder briefly, a small gesture of acceptance that filled him with quiet pride. He never forced these moments, knowing that each act of trust was a choice she was making. And every choice she made strengthened the invisible thread connecting them. Ethan started talking to her about more than just food or grooming. He would tell her about his day, about small happenings on the ranch, about the vast Montana plains stretching beyond the fences. He would speak of dreams and hopes, not expecting her to understand words, but hoping she would sense the intention behind them. Liberty, in turn, would listen in her own way, tilting her head, flicking her ears, shifting her weight closer or farther depending on the emotion she sensed. One morning after a stormy night, Ethan found Liberty standing in the puddled paddock, coat damp and mane clinging to her neck. She shivered slightly but didn't run. He approached slowly, carrying a blanket and a bucket of warm water. "Let's get you cleaned up," he said gently. She allowed him to wrap the blanket around her shoulders, leaning slightly into the warmth, her trust in him evident. That simple act of acceptance felt like a milestone, a quiet affirmation that their bond was growing stronger. Ethan also learned that patience could lead to surprising results. One day, he left the gate open slightly while he tended to another horse. Liberty stepped cautiously toward freedom, testing the boundaries of her environment. She paused at the edge, ears twitching, then turned back to look at him. In that glance, Ethan understood her thought. She wanted to explore, to run, to feel the wind fully on her back, but she also trusted him to be there when she returned. It was a moment that defined their relationship, not ownership, not control, but mutual respect and understanding. Throughout this time, Ethan began to notice subtle changes in Liberty's behavior. She began to relax more in his presence, lowering her head when he approached, allowing him to brush and comb her mane without hesitation. Her eyes, once wary and tense, softened. She would occasionally step closer when he spoke, as if seeking reassurance or companionship. Each small gesture was a reminder that trust, once earned, could flourish into something remarkable. Evenings on the ranch became their shared ritual. Ethan would sit quietly by the paddock, sipping coffee, while Liberty grazed nearby. Sometimes she would wander close enough to let him scratch her neck or whisper softly to her. Other times, she would stand just far enough away to remind him that her freedom was hers to control. Ethan learned to appreciate the balance, closeness without possession, friendship without ownership. It was a lesson in humility and patience that he had never expected to learn from a horse. Ethan began keeping a small journal of their progress, noting the days when she approached him voluntarily, the days when she allowed new touches, the moments when she expressed curiosity or playfulness. It became a record not just of her behavior, but of the bond they were building, a silent testament to patience, respect, and trust. He realized that the story of Liberty was not just her story, it was his too. He was learning to see the world through her eyes, to value freedom, and to understand that true connection was earned through consistent care and understanding. By the end of the month, Liberty's presence was woven into every corner of Ethan's life. She was no longer just a horse in a paddock. She was a companion, a teacher, and a reminder of what it meant to earn trust and respect. Their bond was not about control or ownership. It was about mutual recognition of each other's strength and freedom. And Ethan knew that their journey together was only beginning. He often thought back to the first morning he had met her. The moment when he had felt, almost as if by magic, the whisper in his heart, "Don't buy the horse, choose me. I just want to be free." That whisper had guided him through the weeks, reminding him that every small gesture of patience mattered, that every act of trust was a victory. Liberty had chosen him in her own way, and he had chosen her in return, not as a possession, but as a friend and equal. As the sun set on another quiet Montana evening, Ethan stood by the paddock gate and watched Liberty move through the tall grasses. Her coat glistened in the fading light, her movements fluid and free, yet always aware, always cautious. And in that moment he felt a deep sense of peace. He knew that the trust they had built was fragile, but it was strong enough to carry them both forward. Together, they were learning what it meant to share a bond based on choice, respect, and understanding. One step, one day, one moment at a time. The day of the auction arrived with the kind of early morning chill that made the plains sparkle with frost. Ethan had been preparing for weeks, but nothing could fully prepare him for the anxiety that knotted his stomach. He had heard stories of auctions before, how impatient buyers would chase after horses like prizes, how some animals could be pushed into fear, and how decisions made in haste could change a horse's life forever. Liberty didn't deserve that. She deserved respect, understanding, and most importantly, freedom in whatever form she chose. The auction grounds were alive with noise and movement. People milled about, checking horses, calling out to each other, and discussing prices. The smell of hay mingled with dust and the faint scent of horses themselves. Some animals neighed nervously, their hooves scraping the ground as they tried to make sense of the unfamiliar commotion. Liberty, however, remained calm at first, standing at the far end of the paddock, ears alert, eyes scanning every movement. Ethan could feel her tension, subtle but present, as if she were measuring every person around her and deciding who could be trusted. Other buyers were eager, calling out bids and examining each horse with a detached eye. They did not look for spirit, intelligence, or personality. They were looking for a transaction. Ethan watched them quietly, keeping his distance, letting Liberty see that he was not like the others. She shifted her weight slightly when a tall man approached, his hat casting a shadow over his face. The man extended a hand, trying to catch her attention. Liberty's eyes narrowed and she took a step back. Ethan felt a pang in his chest. He knew she was remembering every moment of past fear and mistreatment. He moved closer, hands open, voice soft. "Easy, Liberty," he whispered. "I'm right here, you're safe with me." For a few moments she stayed still, ears twitching at the distant calls of the auctioneer and the loud voices of buyers. Then, slowly, she turned her head toward Ethan. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to make him feel hope. She was not alone in this moment. She had someone who understood her, who respected her choices, who would not force her into a world she did not want. The auctioneer's voice boomed over the grounds, calling attention to the next horse. Buyers began raising their paddles, shouting numbers and making deals. Liberty's name was called last, her turn approaching quickly. Ethan's heart began to race. He had the means to buy her outright, but something inside him hesitated. Could a sale really give her freedom? Or would it make her feel trapped, even if he meant well? He had seen the fear in her eyes, the way she measured every approach, every movement. He knew that buying her like everyone else might not be the right choice. As Liberty stepped forward into the small enclosure, her hooves clicking against the wooden floor, Ethan noticed the subtle signs of her anxiety. Her tail flicked nervously, ears swiveling and muscles tense. He stayed calm, leaning against the fence, hands visible, speaking softly. "It's okay," he said. "You can choose. I'm not going to make you do anything you don't want." Other buyers shouted their bids, but Ethan remained silent. He wanted her to make the choice, not the auctioneer, not him, not anyone else. And then it happened. Liberty hesitated at the far edge of the enclosure, head low, nostrils flaring. She looked toward the gate, then back at Ethan. Her eyes met his, wide and searching, and in that instant, Ethan understood. She was giving him a chance. If he respected her, if he honored her spirit, she would come to him willingly. A shiver ran down his spine. He raised his hands slightly, keeping them open and calm. "It's your choice, Liberty," he whispered. "Come if you want, stay if you don't, you are free." The crowd did not understand. Some buyers leaned forward, shouting bids higher, eager to claim her as a prize. Ethan ignored them, focused only on her. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating, as people watched the drama unfold without realizing the stakes. This was not about money. This was about trust, freedom, and connection. For a long moment, Liberty did nothing. She shifted her weight from one hoof to the other, eyes darting to the gate, then to Ethan, then to the shouting crowd. The air seemed to hold its breath. Ethan held still, his heart pounding, willing her to see that he was different, that he would not force her, would not push her, would not betray her trust. Then, almost imperceptibly, she took a step forward, and then another. Her hooves made soft thuds against the floor as she closed the distance between them, each movement deliberate, each step a choice she was making. The crowd fell into a hush, sensing something extraordinary, though none could fully understand it. Liberty stopped just a few feet from Ethan, lowering her head slightly. She sniffed the air, nostrils quivering, then nudged his hand gently. Ethan's chest tightened. She had chosen him, not because he had offered the most money, not because he had shouted the loudest, but because she trusted him. He extended his arm slowly, letting her nuzzle against it. The feeling was indescribable. It was the culmination of weeks of patience, understanding, and respect. Liberty had not been bought. She had been chosen, and in choosing, she had given herself freely. The auctioneer's voice seemed distant now, irrelevant against the quiet miracle unfolding. Some of the buyers grumbled, muttering about missed opportunities, but Ethan paid them no mind. All that mattered was Liberty, standing beside him, head high, ears alert, body relaxed yet full of spirit. He ran his hand along her neck, feeling the tension leave her muscles, knowing that the bond they had forged in quiet moments was stronger than any transaction. Ethan had made a decision before arriving at the auction, a silent vow to respect her freedom above all else. Now he realized the full meaning of that vow. Buying her outright would have been easy, but it would not have honored her spirit. Letting her make the choice, trusting her to come to him, had been the true test of their connection. And she had passed, proving that even a heart shaped by hardship could trust again when met with patience, respect, and love. Once Liberty had settled beside him, Ethan led her gently out of the enclosure. She walked with calm confidence now, her head held high, her eyes alert. She glanced around the auction grounds but did not flee, trusting him to guide her without constraint. Each step they took together was a reminder that freedom was not about distance or escape, it was about choice. She could leave at any moment, but she chose to stay. As they walked toward the paddock he had prepared back at the ranch, Ethan spoke softly to her. "You're free to run, Liberty. You're free to choose your path." But if you stay, it's because you want to be here, not because you're trapped." She nudged his side gently, as if acknowledging his words. That small gesture filled him with a sense of profound gratitude. He had been given a gift, the trust of a living being who had survived so much and still carried herself with courage and dignity. The drive back to the ranch was quiet. Liberty stood calmly in the trailer, ears twitching at the sights and sounds, but trusting Ethan completely. When they arrived, he opened the gate to the paddock he had prepared for her, a wide, open space with fresh grass, a small pond, and plenty of room to roam. Liberty stepped out carefully, sniffing the air, testing the ground, and then, with a flick of her tail, began to explore. She paused, looking back at Ethan, eyes meeting his once again. It was a silent promise, a bond strengthened by respect and freedom. Ethan spent the rest of the day watching her. She moved through the paddock with grace, stopping occasionally to graze, lift her head, and scan the horizon. He saw moments of hesitation, but each one was followed by a choice to continue exploring, to trust the world around her. Liberty was no longer just a horse at a ranch. She was a creature who had survived hardships, faced fear, and made the conscious choice to trust again. Neighbors who came to visit noticed the bond immediately. They saw a horse who carried herself with dignity and intelligence, moving not out of fear or habit, but with purpose and awareness. Ethan explained only briefly how he had allowed Liberty to choose, emphasizing that the connection between them was built on trust, patience, and respect. People marveled, but Ethan knew that no words could fully capture what had happened that day at the auction. It was a story written not in transactions or money, but in the silent language of hearts meeting across species, a story of choice and freedom. As the sun dipped below the Montana hills, casting long shadows across the paddock, Ethan sat on the fence, watching Liberty move through the grass. Her coat glistened in the fading light, her movements fluid and unforced. She paused to look back at him, eyes soft and steady, and in that gaze Ethan felt the weight of what had been achieved. She had survived, she had chosen, and she had trusted, and he had honored that trust. The day had begun with tension, uncertainty, and the fear of mistakes. By evening, it had transformed into something rare and beautiful, a bond forged through patience, understanding, and respect. Liberty was free in every sense that mattered, and Ethan knew that their story was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, new fears to face, and more trust to build. But the foundation was solid. They had faced the test together, and they had succeeded. That night, as Liberty settled in the paddock under the wide, starlit sky, Ethan walked quietly back to the barn. He paused to look at her one last time before closing the gate. She had made her choice, and he had honored it. In the quiet of the Montana night, he understood that freedom was not just the absence of barriers, it was the presence of choice, trust, and respect. And in Liberty, he had found all three. The morning after the auction, the sun rose slowly over the Montana plains, painting the fields in soft gold and amber. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of earth and grass, and the gentle rustle of leaves hinted at the promise of a new day. Ethan stepped out of the barn, stretching his arms and letting the morning calm wash over him. He could hear Liberty moving in the paddock, her hooves brushing against the dew-covered grass. She was exploring again, stepping carefully yet confidently, as if learning the true meaning of freedom for the first time in her life. Ethan walked toward the paddock quietly, not wanting to startle her. Liberty lifted her head as he approached, ears pricked forward and eyes meeting his. There was no fear there, only recognition and trust. She had chosen to stay, but she had also chosen to be herself, unfettered, alert, and full of spirit. Ethan smiled, feeling a quiet joy that words could hardly express. He knew that every small step of patience, every careful gesture over the past weeks had led to this moment. Liberty was not just a horse in a paddock. She was a being with agency, a soul who had endured hardship and now moved with freedom and confidence. The morning routine was gentle. Ethan carried a bucket of fresh oats and some apples, placing them carefully in Liberty's feeding area. She approached without hesitation, sniffing the offerings, and then looked back at him, as if inviting him to sit and watch. He did, leaning against the fence, observing her grace and independence. The other horses in the paddock moved around too, but Liberty seemed aware of her own space and boundaries, and she claimed them with quiet authority. Over the next few days, Ethan focused on helping Liberty explore her freedom while maintaining the trust they had built. He set up a series of gentle obstacles and exercises in the paddock, small logs to step over, shallow streams to cross, and soft hills to climb. Liberty approached each one cautiously at first, but with each step she grew bolder. Ethan walked alongside her, never forcing her, never rushing, always speaking softly and calmly. Each success, no matter how small, was celebrated with gentle pats and encouraging words. It was not long before Ethan noticed a remarkable change. Liberty had begun to show curiosity about the world beyond the paddock. She would lift her head to watch the birds in the trees, follow the flight of hawks overhead, and even glance toward the fences as if imagining what lay beyond. Ethan could see the spark of her spirit shining through, a spirit that had been dimmed by neglect but was now fully alive. He understood then that freedom was not just about space. It was about confidence, curiosity, and the ability to make choices without fear. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Liberty approached Ethan with a quiet determination. She nuzzled his shoulder gently, then stepped back to survey the paddock. For a long while she moved slowly, pausing at every familiar tree, every patch of soft grass, every gentle rise in the land. It was as if she were rediscovering the world, learning that it could be safe, beautiful, and full of possibilities. Ethan watched, heart swelling, knowing that the bond between them had grown into something extraordinary. Ethan also began teaching Liberty small lessons in trust and communication. He would call her name softly and wait for her response, rewarding her with pats or treats when she approached. Over time, Liberty learned that she could make choices and still be safe, that coming to him voluntarily was always her decision, and that he would never demand more than she was willing to give. These lessons deepened their connection, reinforcing the idea that true companionship was built on respect, patience, and understanding. Neighbors and friends who visited the ranch were amazed at the transformation. They saw a horse who moved with intelligence, grace, and a clear sense of self. Liberty was not merely following commands or responding to training. She was interacting with her world on her own terms, guided by her instincts and trust in Ethan. People often commented on her beauty, but Ethan knew the real beauty lay in her spirit, the resilience, courage, and quiet strength that shone in her every movement. Evenings became a sacred time for both of them. Ethan would sit by the paddock fence, watching Liberty graze or trot freely, and sometimes she would come close, nudging his side or resting her head briefly on his shoulder. They shared long moments of silence, communicating in ways words could never capture. Ethan felt honored to witness her independence and grace, and Liberty seemed to recognize the gentle care he provided. Together, they shared a balance of closeness and space, a rhythm of companionship and freedom that neither had experienced before. One day, a new challenge arrived. A strong windstorm swept across the plains, rattling the fences and shaking the trees. Most of the herd became nervous, stamping their hooves and neighing. Liberty paused, ears pricked, muscles tense, but she did not panic. She had faced fear before, and now, with Ethan's calm presence nearby, she learned to weather it with courage. He stood close, speaking softly, rubbing her neck and shoulders to reassure her. When the storm passed, Liberty shook herself, flicked her tail, and returned to grazing. It was a small victory, a lesson in resilience, and a confirmation of the trust and confidence she had gained. Ethan also noticed how Liberty began to care for the other horses in subtle ways. She would approach Daisy, the older mare, with gentle nudges, and sometimes stand quietly beside the younger ones, offering a calming presence. Her own past hardships seemed to have given her a unique empathy, a wisdom in how to relate to others. Ethan marveled at this transformation, realizing that freedom was not only about self-discovery, but also about the ability to form meaningful connections with those around her. As the seasons changed, Liberty became more adventurous. She would trot along the edges of the paddock, sniffing new scents, watching distant hills, and sometimes breaking into playful gallops that sent her mane flying in the wind. Ethan allowed her these moments, knowing that real freedom meant giving her space to express herself fully. He would watch from a distance, heart full, feeling proud and grateful for the bond they shared. One evening, as autumn leaves drifted lazily across the paddock, Liberty approached Ethan with a gentle nudge, resting her head on his shoulder. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over the plains. In that quiet moment, Ethan felt the depth of their connection, trust earned, freedom respected, and a friendship that transcended words. He whispered softly to her, "You are free, Liberty." But I am glad you choose to stay with me." She shifted slightly, brushing her muzzle against his arm, and then turned to graze peacefully nearby. Ethan reflected on the journey they had shared. From the first moment he met her at the auction, he had known there was something special about Liberty. She had survived neglect, fear, and uncertainty, yet she had never given up. She had chosen to trust again, to embrace freedom, and to form a bond based on mutual respect. Ethan felt a quiet pride not in owning her, but in being part of her story, in helping her rediscover confidence, joy, and choice. The bond between them was evident to anyone who visited the ranch. Friends and neighbors often commented on the remarkable connection, noting how Liberty moved with intelligence, awareness, and grace. But Ethan knew that what they saw on the surface was only a part of the story. The true story was in the small gestures, the gentle nuzzles, the shared silences, the careful steps of trust that had built a bridge between human and horse. Winter approached, and the ranch took on a quiet, peaceful rhythm. Liberty adapted to the cold, her coat thickening naturally, and she moved through the snow with the same elegance and awareness she had shown in warmer months. Ethan watched her play in the snow, rolling, kicking, and trotting with joy. Each movement was a testament to her resilience, freedom, and spirit. It was a reminder that even those who have suffered most can find joy and confidence again when treated with care, patience, and respect. Ethan also began documenting their story, writing in his journal about the lessons he had learned from Liberty. He noted how patience, understanding, and respect had created a bond stronger than ownership or control. He wrote about her courage, empathy, and intelligence, hoping that others might learn from their journey together. Liberty had taught him that true companionship was not about possession. It was about shared trust, choice, and freedom. Spring returned, bringing new growth and fresh beginnings. Liberty roamed the paddock with renewed energy, exploring new paths, investigating flowers, and running with joy that seemed to lift the very air around her. Ethan smiled, realizing that she had fully embraced her freedom while maintaining her bond with him. She could leave at any moment, yet she chose to stay. That choice, freely given, was the greatest gift he could ever receive. As the sun set over the Montana plains, painting the sky with colors of hope and promise, Ethan and Liberty stood together at the edge of the paddock. Her head rested lightly against his shoulder, and he felt a profound sense of gratitude. They had faced fear, uncertainty, and hardship together, and they had emerged stronger, bonded, and free. Liberty was no longer just a horse in a paddock. She was a symbol of trust, courage, and the beauty of freedom chosen willingly. In the quiet of that evening, Ethan realized that their story would continue, filled with shared moments of joy, understanding, and exploration. Liberty had chosen her path, and he had chosen to honor it. Together, they would face the world not as master and possession, but as companions, friends, and equals. And that, he knew, was a freedom far more precious than anything money could buy.